Welcome back, fellow engineers, to another Space Engineers tutorial. Today we are covering a special request. One of our community members had some questions about some ways to set up refineries and assemblers beyond the basic ones in the beginning of the game. And this video is to respond to that, but also to provide information for the rest of you as well. So let's get started. This is just tips and tricks and suggestions for myself. These are no means a end-all be-all to the conversation. There's obviously a million different ways to do different things based off of your imagination and your creativeness. What I've got right here is I have some assemblers. I have the vanilla assembler, the industrial, and the vanilla refinery and the industrial refinery, as well as the industrial the warfare reactor, large cargo container, and a small cargo container, and an oxygen tank. So, tip number one: don't keep all your eggs in one basket. This right here is just an example build. I would never build anything like this above ground, right? Because literally all of my eggs are in one basket. This one room could be pulverized and I'd no longer have access to refineries, assemblers, or maybe even my reactor or my storage containers. But for simplicity purposes, I've built it this way. Tip number two: backups to backups to backups, right? Redundancy. Every component has at least 2 conveyor ports. At least 2. When you are looking at your components, know where those conveyor ports are, right? So if we're looking at the refineries, this is the industrial large refinery. It has 3 ports on it, 1 on top and then 1 on each side. It also has 8 module ports on it, and they're all on the back. If we look at the vanilla large refinery, it has 8 module ports on it, but it also has 1 additional conveyor port. So there's 1 on each side at the bottom of the refinery, and there's 1 at the very bottom and 1 at the very top of the refinery. And the same is true for the well, I say it's true. The industrial assembler only has 2 ports, 1 on each end. The top and the bottom each have a module connection, and then there's 2 module connections in the back. And then the vanilla assembler has 3 connecting ports on it. I know 4, I'm sorry, 4 connecting ports. There's 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom, and then 1 on each side. But unlike the industrial assembler, this assembler in and of itself, if we're talking about just one assembler, only has 2 spots for modules. But you can daisy chain these assemblers to support up to 8 modules. It all depends on how you stack them, and then you can do some cross using modules across assemblers, right? So this module, these 2 modules, and the ones over there are all cross connected. They run between the assemblers instead of attached to just one. Now you can do the same thing with these other ones too. You can put two assemblers next to each other, and you could cross connect them that way. But there really wouldn't be a whole lot of point to it, right? Because there's enough ports for modules that you wouldn't have to do that. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3, when it comes to modules, know where they go and know where to build. Right? If I had taken this refinery right here and plopped it right up against that wall, I wouldn't have been able to put the modules on it. So you're going to want to keep 2 blocks behind your refineries and any place where you're going to be putting modules on. All right, same thing over here. If I had put the 2 modules on here, this would have been my walkway, and then my wall would have been right here. Tip number 4. Kind of ties in with tip number 1 with the redundancy. Know what you're doing in terms of your playing style, right? Or what type of server you may be on. If you're on a PvP server, building a bunch of overhead conveyors like this may not be a great idea, right? You may want to build them inside your floors like this. Or you may want to build them underground like this. This makes them less susceptible to damage, and it also means that you may not have to have or spend as much in material cost in order to connect things, right? If I'm trying to use all the redundancies in a system, right? We'll take this assembler right here as an example. I have 2 conveyor ports on it. I've got both of them connected. All right. And I'm coming out of both of them. The difference is one goes above ground, one goes through the floor. All right. If one of these blocks gets taken out, I'm good to go on this side. But this assembler doesn't have any blocks on the bottom. So it may not be worth using this one on a PvP server if you want to protect your conveyors and put them underground, right? And the reason I say that is because it's a whole lot easier for a player or an NPC if you're playing with something like Reavers or something like that. It's a lot easier for a player or an NPC to take out a conveyor than it is to take out an assembler or a refinery or something like that, right? So players mostly aren't going to spend a whole lot of time trying to take these out, unless of course they can't get to your conveyor blocks. That being said, the more time they spend trying to take this out, the more time your weapons can try to take them out. So underground on a PvP, or if you're using a mod like Reavers, might be your best bet. Obviously, doing underground isn't nearly as creative as, you know, running conveyors across the top like so, or even running them through the floor like this. But that's just my suggestion if you're playing on a PvP server or using mods like Reavers or something. Tip number 5. Always leave yourself with access, right? So I have access to everything through this cargo container right here, right? But I also have access to this cargo container by means of this port right here. Now, I put this cargo container inside this little wall and roof structure just to demonstrate. I know that having this hole right here is ugly, okay? But you never want to cover up your ports, right? Or if you do, you want to cover them up with, you know, something like maybe a window, right? So you can still see them, you know they're there, and it does, you know, windows are fairly inexpensive. You can just take them out. You could even use a catwalk, right, as well. But don't cover them up. It gives you a way to connect to them if you have to, right, manually, like this. But if you're not worried about that, then maybe do something like this right here. Just throw in a conveyor junction so that you can still connect to that with a conveyor tube if you need to, and it won't be covered up by a more expensive or potentially more expensive armor block, like if you're using heavy armor around something like that. Tip number 6, conveyor junctions. In a base, conveyor junctions, in my opinion, are situational, right? You don't need a whole line of conveyor junctions. They're certainly easier to deal with than conveyor tubes, but they don't take a whole lot of imagination to place down. In a ship, however, conveyor junctions are probably the easier route to go with, because you can lose conveyor junctions and still have a lot of your stuff still connected. And it makes it easier to greeble around and decorate your ships and stuff like that. But in a base, I would say they're situational. Make sure that you don't do anything like bring your hydrogen tanks or your ammo containers, you know, any containers that you're storing ammo in. You want that to be separate from everything else. All right? If you're using a script like Izzy's Inventory Manager, then designate your ammo containers so that the script doesn't just throw ammo, you know, into a collective container, right? And the reason being is because hydrogen tanks to ammo containers are magazine containers, and that means that when they're destroyed, they explode. So I would keep your hydrogen separate from your ammo, and your hydrogen and your ammo separate from everything else, as much as possible. On a base, just stick them underground. That's the easiest thing to do. In a ship, you're going to want them more towards the middle of the ship as much as possible. But again, separate from things, because it's going to take out a lot of blocks, particularly a large hydrogen tank. It's going to take out a lot of blocks. I want to thank our community member for the comment, and I want to thank all of our community members for being a part of this community, and I want to thank everybody else for watching these videos. It helps the community, it helps the channel, and I really do appreciate your support. So if you have any questions or comments or concerns about Space Engineers, feel free to leave a comment below, and if I have an answer, I will try to answer your question or create a video on it, whichever one will suit the purpose best. Thank you, everyone, and I will see you next time. Have a good day. Bye-bye.